to change it up. So we're going to really just be talking about identity, credential, and access management, and why it is so important and critical to the zero trust architecture.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks. So I'll start off with the big one. Why is identity going to be so critical in zero trust?
Yeah, it's an important question. And I talk to customers a lot about this. We have over 15,000 organizations that trust us as their platform for identity across their organizations. And DOJ is one of those. And we love all of our customers, but maybe we love DOJ just a little bit more since you've been such a great customer of ours. And I think the conversations go something like, everyone understands that we're moving from this world of where really a lot of things were on premise, behind the firewall, where you could make assumptions about devices and what kind of devices connected. And there were a lot of the security and access management paradigms were based on that. And we're moving to this world where there's data centers, but there's also cloud infrastructure, there's also SaaS applications. And the challenge of technology really becomes, how do we combine that all together in a secure way? And you essentially have to move the security rules and the access rules away from devices and away from networks, and you have to make them about the person. And so to do that, you have to have a system of record of who's who and what they can do. And that's really what identity is, and that's what our platform does. So for our customers, we sit right in the center of this move to zero trust, because we give them the system of record of who can do what, when, and what, and what permissions and what devices and what applications, and we let them build their zero trust strategy around that.
Yep, that is a point that we've assessed here at DLG as well, and we know, networks and cloud is slowly going away, so we're going to have to focus on really the person, the identity, the device itself, things like that. So what are the limitations of trying to do that model with the legacy authentication or access management methodologies?
Well, the challenges of this are long, and we could talk a long time about the challenges. And I was thinking about the previous question we just talked about. I don't mean to imply that it's just super easy. You just wave your hand and this is all this perfect new world we're all in. That's not realistic at all. The reality is that we're all trying to move our agencies and our organizations forward in a very complex technology landscape that includes many generations of technology, many applications and workloads that work and we don't want to change them, and many that are emerging that need to be changed. And so it's a very complex, dynamic environment. And I think one of the biggest challenges is trying to balance change and strategic value to your organization from all this new technology, while at the same time making sure you keep the old stuff working and you keep the investments that you've made paying off, and you take advantage of all the new opportunity. And it's, in a way, it's centering things around identity helps you with that as well, because you can get some of the benefits of the legacy technology, while at the same time having this foundation to move to the future. I'll give you a more concrete example. So in our customer base, there's no customer we ever sell to that has no identity. They all have identity technology, whether it's even, the operating systems come with identity, application stacks come with identity. And so from the ground up, our identity platform is about integrating with those things. And in fact, one of the things we've defined in the industry is we have this concept of this integration network, which is over 7,000 systems are pre-integrated to our platform. So what it allows you to do is, as you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about cloud, you're thinking about more zero trust models, you're thinking about more flexibility in your technology stack, you can put in our identity platform. And then with that as the foundation, you can start moving pieces as they make sense. And you're not forced into this massive upgrade of all your years of identity technology. You can put in OKTA and move applications and move workloads as it makes sense. And like you said, so specifics on this, it's nice to hear me talk about this at a high level, but we've actually done a lot of research on this and published reports and numbers. So we publish a report every year called the Businesses at Work Report, which essentially takes aggregated anonymized data across our over 15,000 organizations and gives our customers and gives the community at large insight into what technology trends are relevant. And one of the things we see specifically around Microsoft and legacy Microsoft authentication is that if you just by having in a government organization, and this is based on empirical data, this is not me speculating. So in a government organization, if you enable the legacy Microsoft protocols, for example, POP for mail, if you enable that, if you just look at the ratio of legitimate logins to attempted malicious logins, the ratio goes up over 100 times in terms of more illegitimate or attacking logins if you have these legacy technologies enabled. So it's because these things are so vulnerable. So by putting an identity platform in place, you can turn off some of those technologies and you can enable the modern technologies and the modern authentication protocols to keep your posture more robust.
Yeah, that's definitely, we see that a lot. We're in the security operations center a lot, and so we do see a lot of password stuffing attacks, things like that on the legacy type of authentication. So
it's not because anyone's. It's hard, right? It's hard because you have businesses and users that are demanding access, and sometimes the technology hasn't been keeping up with ways to. And this is what zero trust is all about. It's like make things easy and secure. So make it flexible. You can log in from outside the network, inside the network. You can use a cloud service. You can use your own on-premise infrastructure, and you do balance that. And since you have this identity system, you can actually have the granular permission, so you don't trust things blindly based on device or network. You actually trust things based on the person. You can constrain it without having the user feeling it's constrained. If we had more of that, I think there would be less of reason to have these legacy protocols enabled, because you wouldn't have to rely on some of these overly simplistic models of the past.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, how can organizations bring zero trust approaches to their not just their organization, but their supply chains as well? Kind of, the programs that they rely on, the vendors they rely on.
Yeah, that's interesting thing about zero trust is that it kind of what's the right term? It kind of flattens the whole ecosystem in the sense that I think in the old model of security, which was network based or perimeter based security, you had kind of two zones or two areas that weren't equal. You had internal and then you had external, and it was like internal was the perimeters guarded, it was super locked down, and you trusted that, and external was the untrusted, the wild west. And zero trust is really about flattening that and making everything equal, and making less differentiation between what's internal and what's external, and by extension you make external as secure as internal because it's all flat and equal and secure. So I think a lot of it, Kevin, is a mindset shift. Like a lot of things, when you're trying to move an organization forward with a technology strategy or an objective for the organization, you have to shift the mindset. And once you shift the mindset, there are technical challenges and realities of moving there. But with some of the tools and some of the platforms that are evolving, it's getting easier and easier to do once the mindset shift has happened.
Gotcha. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And I know government agencies have a lot of partners, a lot of business and citizens that they interact with, and making sure that those identities are also tracked, not just looking at internally, but externally is key. Do you see, I guess, kind of aside for that overall identity ecosystem, do you see how do we track identity across all those different areas? Do we go with federation, kind of the old model? Do we look at authenticators that are universal? Any thoughts there?
Well, I think that I think a good first step is making sure that all of the silos of identity across the extended supply chain, across different elements of a complex organization, those things are all up to snuff in terms of modern authentication, in terms of multi-factor authentication, in terms of authenticators, but biometric authenticators, PIV cards, things like that. So I think that's foundational. So like I said before, every system, every computer system has identity. So it's not like you have to introduce identity to computer systems. It's more about how do you get all of those identity systems up to snuff. That's level one, multi-factor, sound policy about who can use what resource, et cetera. I think level two is integrating those things together. So giving organizations or even extended supply chains one consistent view across the entire path. So it's not a different version of what Kevin can do over here, disjointed with a different version of what Kevin can do across the organization. Now, one of the challenges with that is that in a concrete example where that trips people up is just the deprovisioning process. So when constituents leave the organization or they transfer and they have different roles, time and time again in these attacks, you see that permissions weren't taken away. It's because that's a symptom of that second level not done right, the integration. And I think a good identity platform can help you do that. And then there are better technologies to do that even outside of an organization. So things like we've had OAuth and SAML for a long time on the authentication side, but then there are things like SCIM, which is a provisioning standard. Even some of the emerging things that we're working on and other partners in the ecosystem are working on will make it further possible and easier to integrate the actual core identity across the extended supply chain.
Yeah, and I heard you mention SCIM. I know that's one of those APIs to help transfer identity information across different systems. You see more and more applications adopting SCIM, or how do you see application owners kind of taking advantage of the new modern authentication? I'm the founder of OKTA in addition to the CEO. So I started the company 13 years ago. And one of the big changes, there's been it's a long time, right? 13 years. One of the big changes is that more applications, especially SaaS applications, support some of these modern protocols. When we first started OKTA, we had this vision of we're going to build the world's first cloud native pre-integrated identity stack. And it sounds now like it's more of a common thing, but back in the day, it was pretty crazy pretty revolutionary to think that an identity platform is not just going to be a toolkit, but it's going to be pre-integrated to everything in your ecosystem. And one of the knocks on it at the time was that there's not enough of these apps to support these APIs. And so they don't support SAML, they don't support OAuth, they don't support OpenID, WS-Fed. There's a lot of these federation standards. And they don't support APIs to integrate the directories. And so one of the big changes over the years is you've seen the number of applications that support things like SAML, WS-Fed, OpenID Connect, and then on the kind of the directory synchronization side, things like SCIM and that number of applications that support those has risen dramatically. And I think that's because the customers and organizations are finding this way more compelling and valuable and reducing risk. And it's a virtuous cycle. The more people that support the APIs and the capabilities, the more a platform like OKTA can become pre-integrated to them, and then more support APIs, and there's more pre-integration. So the benefit is customers that don't have to do all the wiring up together themselves. Yeah, we're seeing that too, especially with SaaS apps. They all come with a lot of those integrations.
Wasn't true 10 years ago. Yeah,
I can believe you.
No, I mean, did you see the same thing? You saw the same thing?
Yeah, we see definitely more and more applications are now supporting those standards. So that's really good to see. And now, it's about how do we modernize some of the legacy applications as well? Have you seen any strategies around that? And maybe taking a traditionally on-prem, Kerberos-based application and trying to get it into that model? Or anything like that?
I think the general, so the realities of the world are that everyone has a lot of legacy. There's no company that has, just all this perfect world where everything's modern and new. That's just unrealistic. And you wouldn't want that. If you have that, it means you're probably a small little startup, or you don't have any investments that have paid off in terms of working technology. So that's the reality. I think the strategy that I've seen the most is basically have a platform to move to the future things, whether that's a cloud platform like Amazon or Azure or Google, whether that's a identity platform like OKTA, and then that'll give you flexibility on some of these core fundamental layers to start moving the right workloads there and taking advantage of SaaS applications in the right posture, while at the same time keeping your legacy stuff working. Now we have done, the industry and OKTA as well, we've done more and more to actually go back into that legacy technology and connect it to OKTA. We have a product called the OKTA Access Gateway, which basically think of it as it's like a web server plugin you put on premise to essentially expose your legacy infrastructure, things like Kerberos and legacy on-premise applications, that you can expose it to Okta so that it can looks to the end user like a SaaS application with super easy login, and it appears right on your dashboard. And for your security teams and for your IT teams, they can manage it just like they would manage a cloud app. So call that the shim strategy. So you put a shim in front of this legacy application to try to get some of the benefits of being modern without the cost or the complexity of moving something that's working.
Yeah, definitely a good model, and something we're looking at here at DOJ. And so applications, right, identity provider sort of platforms, it's a big community of different technologies and standards. How do you think the entire community can become more collaborative and transparent?
We've talked a little bit about it with the APIs and the integration points, and I think that we're doing a good job as an industry of moving that forward. I think one area, Kevin, where we can do better is collaborating around the risks of breaches and the impact of breaches and the way to remediate breaches. I think that we had a security issue in the last month or so. We can talk a little bit about that, and it's been super enlightening to me, and I've seen firsthand how we can get better as an industry, because and we can talk about the details of it, but everyone's first reaction is to, as soon as there's any kind of security issue, is to clam up and not talk about it. There's a lot of reasons for that, whether that's legal reasons or regulatory reasons. They're very real reasons. And I think that you could make the argument against those or for those, but the fact of the matter is that it prevents us as a community, a security community, from responding and letting the bad guys get further than we want them to. And just so some way to encourage that collaboration and that sharing and that disclosure. I know that I think I really applaud the Biden administration for some of the front-footed approach they've taken on specifically on cloud security and cybersecurity, with things like doing executive orders around zero trust, which has done more to raise the visibility and the awareness of zero trust in our community than anything ever, probably. Around multi-factor authentication, which is a very simple step. It's a conceptually simple, sometimes harder to implement, but a simple step forward. And then I know Congress has passed legislation about requiring disclosures, and which I think is a positive step. And I know CISA is working on furthering these things and making more collaborative, especially in the federal side, to collaborate and communicate. And I think this is all really good, because if we're gonna beat the bad guys, we're gonna do it together. You're not going to have some scenario where DOJ is super secure and at the expense of someone else, or vice versa. So it's got to be more collaboration.
I agree. We can all be more secure together. And I guess I'm sure people might be interested on the incident. Is there anything you'd like to share on that point?
Yeah, for sure. So it was a month ago now, 2 months ago. I've lost track of the months, Kevin.
Tell you.
And it's pretty interesting. So there was a breach at one of our a call center that had call center agents in that call center that supported Okta's commercial customers. None of the federal, because of FedRAMP certification and the way we do our systems, the federal customers were totally independent. They're not in the same call centers at all. As you know, there's different support systems and different, totally segmented. So this was on the commercial side. And because of this breach, the attacker was able to essentially look over the shoulder of some of the support reps that were supporting Okta customers. And that had that allowed that hacker to take some screenshots of some customer support sessions that at the end of the day, the information that was on those screenshots wasn't that sensitive, and the control that the attacker gained by being in that network wasn't that significant. But everyone has such a heightened awareness right now around what's going on in the world and the risk of cyber and some of the inaccurate claims the hacker made online. It really caused a lot of stress and anxiety for everyone. And through this whole process, I think one of the strengths of Okta is that we're a learning organization. We over the years we've been really good at taking our mistakes and our things we could do better and getting better from them. And in this situation is no exception. We're going to do a lot better and improve a lot because of this. Things like making sure that our third parties don't get breached. And there's not only contractual and regulatory and risk management frameworks to make sure that doesn't happen. Those are in place. Those have always been in place. We can do better. We can do a better job auditing those and assuring they're being complied to. But also, and this is probably the biggest lesson for me, it's not enough. You have to have technical enforcement as well. You can't just you need multiple layers. Like we all know this, multi-layered security. So you have to have the audit and the risk management and the process there. But you also have to have technical enforcement. We shouldn't allow a breach to, if there's a breach in one of our third parties, to allow visibility into a support session. That should be technically enforced, and we can do that. We can do a better job of that. And the last thing I'll say on this, and maybe I'm sure you'll have more questions, we can drill into this, but another big learning for me was, and kind of something back we were talking earlier about how zero trust is really about flattening the whole ecosystem and not treating your own network different than external, treating it all the same and having great security and usability across the whole thing. So one of the learnings for me is that Okta has had incredibly high focus on our own security in terms of the company, in terms of the organization, in terms of the product, in terms of the technology. And I think we didn't have as much as we should on that next ring out on these third parties. I mean, the basics were there, but we need to apply that rigor and that completeness across the entire ecosystem. I think we all can learn from that.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable point. That something, even with the SolarWinds incidents, right? It's about your supply. It opened the window to what about your supply chains? What about the people who are processing your data on your behalf? Things like that. So that's a good point.
Yeah, the good news is that SolarWinds reminded me of this. So if we all, again, we have opportunity here because when we all move to full zero trust, it helps across all the range of issues. It helps across things like, what happened at Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline, the ransomware attack that was so impactful and so bad for that organization, many of the customers, it was MFA that wasn't implemented on some of the systems allowed the hacker to get in there and start the attack. Zero trust helps with that. We get strong authentication, and then once they get in, more importantly, they can't just move around without any barriers because we have that. We don't trust everything in that network. SolarWinds, it's like totally different attack. It's a piece of malware essentially, or it comes in the supply chain, and a software that you trust comes in. So it even protects from that because that gets in your network, and then all of a sudden that's pretty bad in the old world because everything on the network is trusted, but it's still bad, but it's more manageable in zero trust because that thing just doesn't get unfettered trust like it would before. So by moving to these architectures, it's a really good value for us because we get protection against a lot of these different types of attacks.